Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our CSBG Annual Report, How to Prepare for Reporting. This is the second webinar in the Annual Report webinar series for the fiscal year 2022 reporting season. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. First, everyone has been muted on entry. We do ask that everyone remains muted throughout the webinar. Second, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter those using the Q&A function on Zoom. We will have time to address those questions at the end of the webinar, and this Q&A is what the presenters will be monitoring. Third, this webinar is being recorded. The recording, along with a copy of the slides, will be posted to the OCS CSBG Webinars page, linked here. And as of right now, the slides. And with that, I will hand it over to Verna.
Thank you, Monique, and good morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone, and happy 2023 to each of you. I'm Verna Best, and I'm the Program Operations Branch Chief for the Office of Community Services, Division of Community Assistance, and I am beyond grateful to support the CSBG network in this capacity. On behalf of our leadership, both Dr. Laniqua Howard, our Office of Community Services Director, and Sharice Johnson, our Division of Community Assistance Director, I would like to welcome you to our annual report training webinar. As we think about the work of CSBG, and in particular, preparing for the annual report, I wanted to use the analogy of a mountain because as a former state administrator, I recognize that this is a huge undertaking. The quote says, and you can see it on the screen, "Stop staring at mountains, climb them instead." Yes, it's a harder process, but it will lead you to a better view. And I would like to think that this better view will be you individually and collectively reaching your peak. You'll hear about that. So reaching this peak will mean, number one, that you are compliant in your administration of CSBG. Two, and what I believe is most important, is that we're all working to ensure that individuals, families, and communities have access to the best available resources, and that three, we can tell the success of CSBG to any and everyone who needs to know. So as we advance to the next slide, you know that we've been talking about PEAK as our performance management framework. PEAK standing for performance, evaluation, accountability, accessibility, knowledge. And the annual report actually shows up in accountability and knowledge because it is a critical piece of our performance framework. I could go on into that, but you have two excellent presenters today, but I do want to share just a few thoughts with you. The first is that submitting the annual report is a requirement as outlined in Section 678E of the legislation. Therefore, lack of submission based on the instructions as outlined by OCS is a matter of compliance. So the support that we're offering through this webinar with your program specialists, the support of NASCAS, is all designed to ensure that you are successful in meeting this requirement. We would just ask that you be timely and responsive when you receive feedback regarding your submission and this process. And I'll say more about that, even more about that on our quarterly calls that are upcoming. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna turn it back over to Monique, and joining Monique will be Muska Kamran, who is the Director of Research with NASCAS, who has been invited to present with us today. I think it's important to acknowledge that NASCAS is a very valued partner, one of our national partners who works alongside of OCS as our training and assistance partner, as outlined in our cooperative agreement. I think it's important for everyone to remember that OCS has the legislative authority to administer and have the oversight of CSBG. So everything that our partners do support that authority for us to make sure that we are successful with administering CSBG. So it's extremely important that you listen to what NASCAS has to say when they're providing training to us, because they are working alongside of the Office of Community Services. You will get your marching orders and all of those things from OCS and your program specialists, but we work together to make sure that this network is absolutely as strong as it can be. So with that, Monique, I'm going to turn it back over to you and Muska, and if needed, I'll come back on towards the end, but if not, happy trails to everybody with knocking out these annual reports, and we'll see you a bit later. Monique.
Thank you, Verna. You're so enthusiastic, so I hope I can keep the enthusiasm going as we dive into the data. And I'm sure you set us up for some success today, so I'm excited. I'm going to quickly discuss the state's role in reviewing data. As I speak through this data, and as Muska is speaking later throughout this webinar, while we are preparing for the fiscal year 2022 report, everything we share today should also be able to carry over into future reporting as well. So we're thinking not just about what's going on in 2 months, but what do you do when you start preparing for your new reporting period, start preparing for your new reports, including CSBG state plan and future annual reporting. So with that being said, you'll see some icons throughout this presentation that speak towards future planning, preparing for success, and just other tips and going beyond this data that you're reporting in the annual report as you're preparing for future training and technical assistance as well. So how do you as a state review this data? You should review each module for each report. So that's regular CSBG, CARES, and disaster for completeness and accuracy. NASCAS did put together 2 annual report checklists for the modules 2 and 4, and that's on their website and linked here. NASCAS has also sent the SMART forms to all states. And within the SMART forms, we have color-coded errors and warnings. If you see a red error, you should be working with the CSBG eligible entity to update that data prior to submitting to OCS. If you see a yellow field, that means it's a warning, and you should verify the data is accurate prior to submitting to OCS. If the data is accurate, the color won't go away, but you can provide a comment verifying the accuracy of the data when you submit your reports to OCS. We know that sometimes a red error is not able to be fixed immediately, so we would suggest making notes of those errors and warnings and think about that as you prepare for future trainings and technical assistance for annual reporting. So we added this little airplane icon, and when you see that, think about going beyond just the data that you're seeing in that data point or in that module or in that section, and comparing it to other modules and other sections. So here are some tips of comparing Module 2, Section A, expenditures. Compare that to services in Modules 4, Section B. Is the agency reporting expenditures but no services, as well as vice versa? Now, we know that there's not always going to be a perfect match. So an agency might be reporting expenditures, but there might not be as many services. But if there's no services, that's something to talk to the agency about. How are they using those funds in that domain if they're not providing any services in the domain? Same with comparing your services to outcomes. Is the agency reporting a service, but there's no outcomes for that same domain? So again, thinking if we're providing services and there's no outcomes, how are we using those services to help the communities and individuals and families that we serve to become more self-sufficient? And then, of course, comparing your services and outcomes to demographics. Muska is going to talk a little bit more about this later on, but there should not be higher numbers reported in the demographics than what you're reporting in the services. I'm sorry, there shouldn't be higher numbers in the services and outcomes to what you're reporting in the demographics. So services and outcomes, for the most part, are supposed to be unduplicated. We do know that there's a few instances where we do allow a duplicated count, but for the most part, if you're reporting that number of participants and outcomes, that number shouldn't be higher than what you're reporting in the demographics. And then going beyond the annual report, and again, this is about future planning, compare the reported demographics to census data. This is not a requirement, it's just a suggestion that we're making as you are reviewing your data and thinking about planning, future planning, and how to make sure that you're reaching those who are most in need. So thinking about the total number of people who live in poverty compared to how many people that agency served. Thinking about the total number of people who live in a service area to who is serving. Also, are we serving the right population? The census data is one place that gives you a lot of that information, not just for who we're serving, but the community and the populations that we're serving. And also remember that CARES and disaster are a subset of data to the regular CSBG annual report. So all expenditures, funding, services, we don't have outcomes in CARES and disaster, should also be included in your regular CSBG annual report. So if there's a data point in CARES, but that's blank in regular CSBG, that means that they didn't include that information in the regular CSBG annual report. So that's a sign to you that you need to go back to the eligible entity prior to submitting it to OCS to make sure that they didn't miss that data point. Diving into Module 2. Module 2, Section A, 8.1, we have not discussed this as much recently, but we are asking that you please check the reporting period for each agency. What we've noticed is that not all agencies within the state are selecting the same reporting period. However, all agencies should be reporting on the same reporting period. If that is not something that you've discussed with your the eligible entities within your state in the past, we do ask that that is something that you're starting to pay more attention to. It might just be an oversight. The agency may have just checked the wrong box. And if so, that's a quick fix. But we want to make sure that when you're discussing this with the eligible entities, that they understand the reporting period and that they're reporting the data for the correct reporting period. And if they're not, then okay, we have some training and technical assistance to do. So again, it's about using the annual report to set up future training and technical assistance. It's not just a collection. It's not just reporting to OCS. It's using the data that you're receiving to ensure that you're providing training and technical assistance to your agencies to prepare for success. So when you are preparing for data collection, remind your CSBG eligible entities of the correct data reporting period, and that puts them in the right. That's just one quick little check that you know will be right prior to submitting to OCS. And that's one less comment in your review memo. With that, I'll pass it on to Muska to talk about, continue discussing Module 2, Section A.
Thank you, Monique, and thank you, Verna, for that introduction. I also just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us today. It is really important to all of us to be able to tell our story, and we're hoping that the information that we provide here can help you tell a better and more accurate story here. So moving on in Module 2, up next is the expenditures table, which shows up as 8.2 in Module 2. And as local agencies are filling out that expenditures table, there is a section where they can report the expenditures that they had on agency capacity building specifically. You will notice that outlined in red. But if an agency does report expenditures in 8.2i, agency capacity building, they then have to complete 8.4, which is that table you see on the right hand, which explains what those agency capacity building activities were that they spent CSBG funds on. And they can just select checkboxes there, or if they have they have a narrative portion where they can describe what those other agency capacity building expenditures were. Please be mindful of a couple things here. One is that if they complete 8.2i, they must complete 8.4, and this also applies vice versa, which is a trend we are seeing. If they complete 8.4, that means that they are describing activities, agency capacity building activities that were funded by CSBG, which means that there must be then an expenditure reported in 8.2i as well. So notice on the example on screen, in this example, the agency filled out 8.4 and they checked community needs assessment, data management, but then there were no expenditures associated with that in 8.2I. So one thing to be mindful of is making sure that those activities that are being reported in 8.4, just being mindful that those specifically are agency capacity building activities that were funded by CSBG, not just all agency capacity building activities, even if they were not funded by CSBG, right? They have to be funded by CSBG in order to be reported in 8.4. And I'm referring to 8.2I and 8.4 because those are the numbers in the regular report, but those same fields exist in the CARES and disaster report as well. And in those reports, they are 8.3I and 8.5 respectively. Okay, so in preparing for success, you want to make sure that you are reviewing that expenditures data in 8.2 or 8.3 if it's CARES or disaster against 8.4 or 8.5 in CARES and disaster, and to resolve that before submitting to OCS. It is a simple enough check. If you notice one is filled out but not the other, just reaching back out to the local agency to get clarification there and update the data. And in preparation for success, beyond just fiscal year 22, but in general for future reporting, we would recommend states to be doing a TNTA webinar at the beginning of the reporting period that talks through how to collect and report the data. And this could be an example that you put out there to make sure that we get good data there. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So Monique mentioned earlier, right, that CARES and disaster has to be a subset of the regular, and that applies to Module 2, Section A as well, obviously. So you want to make sure that you are comparing your CARES and disaster Section A to the regular Module 2, Section A, and all your CARES and disaster expenditures have to be included in the regular CSBG Module 2 expenditures as well. So walking through an example on screen, on the left hand, you see a screenshot of the regular Module 2 expenditures, and on the right hand, you see a screenshot of the CARES Module 2 expenditures. So notice on the CARES expenditures that this agency is reporting $13,957 for services supporting multiple domains. Well, when I look at services supporting multiple domains on the regular CSBG report, I notice that that $13,957 is not reported there. That is a telltale sign that the agency is not including their CARES or disaster, if you're looking at disaster, that they're not including those expenditures in the regular Module 2, and the regular Module 2 must include all CARES and disaster expenditures. And another thing that is a telltale sign, for example, is looking at the total at the bottom. Notice how the CARES total, $33,957, is greater than the total reported in the regular Module 2, which is only $23,000. That cannot be. That your CARES expenditures must be included in the regular, which means in no situation ever is it possible for your CARES total or your disaster total to be greater than what's reported in the regular Module 2. And I really want to emphasize this point here because we are at a critical point in time, right, with the CARES reporting. And so we want to make sure that we are able to capture that work as much as possible in the regular report as well, because we are saying that the regular report includes all our CARES and disaster activities. So as state offices, please do pay particular attention to this section when you receive the data from your local agencies. If you notice even one instance where the agency seems to not be reporting their CARES expenditure or disaster expenditure in the regular, that's probably a telltale sign that they're not reporting the other expenditures as well, right? So don't focus on just the one data point that happens to be incorrect, but please do reach out and confirm that they are including all their CARES expenditures in the regular. Moving on to the next slide. When you're looking at the CARES and Disaster Module 2, you want to be mindful of checking A.2, which was a new data point that was added specifically to the CARES and Disaster. And that is where the agency should be reporting the total CARES or disaster allocation that they received, not including discretionary, right? So this is primarily out of that funding formula allocation that the agency received. And so you want to make sure that that is reflective of the total. We've seen instances where agencies may be reporting expenditures, like the example you have on screen. It looks like this agency may be reporting their expenditures in 8.2 instead of their total allocation. If you do notice 8.2 matching 8.3K, again, that's just a trigger there to double check with your agencies to make sure that they are reporting the totality of their allocation in 8.2. And when you compare 8.2 to the previous year, 8.2 should be staying the same as the last year, right? Because the agency is reporting the total of their allocation. This doesn't include carryover or expenditures, right? So the agency shouldn't be reporting a lesser amount for 8.2, which is what you see in that first screenshot there, where that agency is reporting less in 8.2 for the current year as opposed to the previous year. That simply cannot be true because they're supposed to be reporting the full allocation, right? So it cannot decrease from what they originally had. Alternatively, you might notice 8.2 increasing from the previous year. If you do notice that, it's worthwhile just again double checking and confirming with the agency. Perhaps it increased because it was misreported in the previous year to begin with. But if that's the case, then again, just double checking with the agency to make sure that that was the reason why, and that the amount now being reported is in fact correct and it reflects the total allocation. So either way, if you notice a change in 8.2 from one year to another, it's worth noting there and reaching out to the agency to confirm what should be reported there. Moving on to the next slide. Along with reviewing the 8.2 year to year in the CARES module 2, you also want to look at expenditures holistically. So with CARES, we know that each agency has a static pot of money, right? They received that full allocation that they received. And so we are expecting the expenditures that they report in CARES to reflect back on that allocation that they received. And this means that an agency cannot have more expenditures over time than what they were allocated, right? That's just basic knowledge. You can't spend more than what you were given to spend. And so what you want to do is take a look at those expenditures over time, year to year, and see if you're noticing anything there. So the example on screen, you notice in the screenshot here that in 8.2, the agency is reporting their total allocation as $150,000, right? That is what they received. When we look at their expenditures, notice that in the previous year on the right hand, they have spent $120,000. And then on the left hand for the current year, for example, they've spent $126,000, right? If you add that up, that gets you to $246,000, give or take a couple, right? But it does not make logical sense for an agency to be spending $246,000 in CARES CSBG if they only received $150,000 in CSBG CARES, right? So if you do notice that, you need to double check either their total allocation is being misreported, which is most likely the scenario happening here. So you want to make sure that that is correctly being reported. Or perhaps it might be the expenditures, right? But one or the other needs to be double checked. And so we would just ask that you review the expenditures holistically over time. If this is the last year of reporting, which it is for a good portion of states, and you know your agency has spent down their CARES allocation by the end of the reporting period, then their expenditures over the past 3 years should total their CSBG CARES allocation, right? So that would be another thing that we really recommend you to take a look at, right? So again, they wouldn't be spending more than what they received in CARES, but if they spent down their CARES allocation, they also wouldn't be spending less than what they had received in the CARES. So please take a look at those items as well. moving on to the next slide. The last portion of Section A in the CARES and Disaster Module 2 is another data point that was added specifically to the CARES and Disaster Module 2. You will not see it in the regular, it's only in the CARES and Disaster, and that is 8.6. And that is a narrative field, and it's intended for you to provide highlights from the current reporting period. It is an opportunity for you to be able to describe how you have used your CSBG CARES dollars if you weren't able to report otherwise, right, in the rest of your module 2 or module 4, right? So it's an opportunity for you to provide more information and share highlights. But we ask that you do not repeat information from the previous reports, right? Because this is the fiscal year 22 report that you will be submitting. We ask that you update that section with information, with new information that's relevant to fiscal year 22. And it's also an excellent place where you can consider and document lessons learned throughout the past few years or any other information that you would like to share. That is a great narrative field for you to do that. Okay, moving on into Section C, which is the last section in Module 2. This applies to the regular CARES disaster, just Module 2 in general. Please ensure to complete any entries written in as other resources. So when you are completing Module 2, there is a standard set of resources that you would type in the dollar amount for. So that's your LIHEAP, Head Start, weatherization, right? They're all listed there. But there's also an opportunity for you to write in resources that are not listed in the list above. When you do write in a resource, we ask that you please provide a complete description. So no acronyms, right? Just a description that can describe what those resources were, a CFDA number in the correct format, right? And so you can refer to the instruction manual for what the correct format is. And then of course the dollar amount associated with that resource. A trend we have been noticing: agencies should not be reporting LIHEAP, Head Start, or any of those other sort of standard resources that are already listed above in that section for other resources, right? And we are noticing that some agencies are doing that, but no agency should be doing that. So as a state office, if you notice that your agency is writing in LIHEAP funds, please ask them to include that in C.3B1 above, right? Or if you notice them writing in Head Start funds or early Head Start funds, please ask them to report that where Head Start funds are being reported, which is C.3B3 or C.3B4 for early Head Start, right? And those are just a couple examples I put out there, but you might notice this apply in general. If you notice that there's a resource that they wrote in that is already in the list above, just make sure that they count it there instead of here. And so in preparing for success on Module 2 and Section C, just advise your agencies in the beginning of the reporting period that they should be reporting all federal resources in the line item that it actually fits in, and to only report it in other if it does not apply to any of the other line items above. And again, as best practice, if you do a TNTA webinar at the beginning of the reporting period, some of these items could be what you highlight there. So moving on to the CARES Module 2, Section C. So in the CARES Module 2, at this point, we say that Section C should report carryover plus any new discretionary or funding from CARES for fiscal year 22, right? So the report says allocations. They're called allocations because that is just what the standard form says, right? But as we have been stating from last year, at this point, agencies should not be reporting the full allocation that they received. They should only be reporting the carryover from the previous year that they carried over into fiscal year 22, plus if they happen to receive any new discretionary or funding for fiscal year 22, right? So if you notice that C.2 is staying the same year to year, that means that probably needs to be checked with the agency, and particularly if agencies showed that they had expenditures the previous year, then we know that their C.2 cannot stay the same, right? Because they're not using the full allocation anymore. At this point, they already spent some of it the previous year, which means that C.2 should be lower than what was reported in the previous year. So please do keep an eye out for that. Moving on to the next slide. So again, just emphasizing that section C for all data points should be reporting carryover plus any new discretionary or funding for fiscal year 22. So C.2 should be getting smaller and smaller as agencies spend that money, which means we would not be expecting it to get bigger. So if you do notice an instance where agencies are reporting a bigger amount in C.2 compared to the previous year, again, you want to just double check that with the agency. It could be because the previous year was misreported to begin with, but if that's the case, then just making a note of it and double checking again that the amount for this year is correct and that it is the carryover plus new funding that they are now reporting there. C.2 also shouldn't be less than what is expected based off of expenditures, and we'll walk through another example shortly. But the idea is, though, right, that if they're reporting the carryover, then it should be based off of how much they spent last year. So there's no reason really why C.2 would be less than what the expected carryover is. So you also want to be on the lookout for that, and I'll walk through an example in future slides. Final notes about section C. In the regular and the CARES and disaster, in all of module 2, we do check for year-to-year variance, which you guys are probably very familiar with if this isn't your first time at the rodeo. Those are just standard flags that are built into the form to just double check if something is significantly different, just to get your eye on it so you can confirm that it is correct. In the CARES and disaster, you will probably see more of those flags because your dollar amounts are decreasing over time, right? So we are expecting the numbers to get lower, which means if you do see a flag there, if the data is correct, it is correct, and you confirm that the data is correct. But otherwise, just take a look at it if you see a flag, but it is flagging because it's a standard built-in validation and the data is probably correct, but you just want to note that it is correct there. Okay, moving on. So some tip when we say looking at your CARES expenditures and allocations together, right? And we'll be sharing slides so you can have this, but here's a simple table we are providing if we assume that there was no discretionary provided to local agencies, right? Which in the majority of cases, this is the situation for a majority of states and agencies is we're not really looking at discretionary, we're just looking at their CARES allocation. So if that's the case, just looking at the 3 years, right? So in fiscal year 20, the agencies are reporting the allocation that they received. That's what they're starting fiscal year 20 off with, right? It's their allocation. In fiscal year 21, when we say you should be reporting your carryover, it's that allocation minus the expenditures from the previous year, which would be in your module 2 8.3K, those total expenditures there, right? So we're preparing for fiscal year 22 submission, right? So what does that mean? Again, it's the same thought process. We are asking that you report the carryover, which means you are looking at what that allocation was, and then you're subtracting what the expenditures have been thus far, which is your fiscal year 20 expenditures and your fiscal year 21 expenditures, right? So you subtract all of the expenditures thus far from your allocation, and that is what the carryover should be for that local agency, right? So just being mindful of taking a look at that when you're reviewing your agency's data. Now, if we throw discretionary into the mix, it gets a little bit complicated, but it's still the same thought process. It just adds another variable here, right? So again, you're reporting your carryover plus if you received any new funding for that fiscal year, right? So starting with, fiscal year 20, that was your allocation, plus if the agency received fiscal year 20 discretionary. Moving into fiscal year 21, we're saying you're reporting your carryover, right? So that's that allocation, right? Same thought process minus your expenditures from the previous year. But now you're just adding on the discretionary you received for fiscal year 21. So when we're talking about fiscal year 22, it's the exact same thought process. It's your carryover plus the new discretionary funding that you received, right? So when we say carryover, that's all that CSBG CARES dollars that the agency has received till date minus what they've spent till date, right? So minus the fiscal year 20 expenditures, minus the fiscal year 21 expenditures, that's your carryover. And now you just add on your fiscal year 22 discretionary. So I hope that that explains it in as simple a way as possible, but we're going to walk through an example here. So again, we're using a simple example just for the sake of simplicity. If you're a small state, you do know that you actually did receive additional funding, but we're just not going to refer to additional funding for now. Just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to pretend there was only ever one allocation, which applies for the majority of states and majority of agencies. So let's say in this example that an agency received $100,000 in their CSBG CARES allocation, right? This means that in fiscal year 20, they reported 100,000 in 8.2 and C.2, right? Let's say they spent 40,000 in fiscal year 20, and then they received $10,000 in discretionary for fiscal year 21. So for fiscal year 21, the agency notice still is reporting $100,000 in 8.2, right? Because 8.2 should not be changing because they're reporting their total allocation. If you're a small state, it would change because you had a new allocation, but for a majority of states, it will not change. So in fiscal year 21, again, the same thought process, it's your carryover plus if you got new funding. So their carryover from the previous year is $60,000 because they spent 40,000, which means they have 60,000 left. And now in this example, they also happen to get $10,000 in discretionary, which means they report $70,000 total in fiscal year 21. It also means that that agency can't spend more than $70,000 in fiscal year 21 either, right? So you want to look for that relationship. The expenditures can't be more than the allocation. And we're talking about 20 and 21 because, again, when we talk about carryover, we have to look at the full picture from day one. So now when we move into fiscal year 22, moving on to the next slide, let's say that the agency had spent $60,000 in fiscal year 21. So again, in fiscal year 22, the agency still reports $100,000 in 8.2 because that is the total allocation they received. Anything more or less than that is incorrect. And for their carryover in C.2, notice that they are now reporting $10,000 because they had $70,000 last year, but they spent $60,000, which means they are left with the $10,000 from last year. And then they didn't get any discretionary, which means that their total that they report in C.2 for this year is $10,000. It also means that the agency can't spend more than $10,000 that year either, right? So I hope that this example can kind of explain how from year to year, how you calculate that carryover in relation to your expenditures. And on the next slide, we'll be able to just show it in table format. So this is just that example, but in table format, you notice year to year that 8.2 stays at 100,000, and then that CARES C.2 you notice gets smaller and smaller based off of their expenditures, right? So by fiscal year 22, in this example, this agency is only left with the $10,000. And so that would be what they report. And yes, slides will be shared. Absolutely. So after you calculate, right, what that CARES C.2 is supposed to be and what your disaster C.2 is supposed to be, whatever you calculate for your CARES and disaster section C data points after, calculating the carryover and new funding, then you just add that to your regular Module 2 Section C data points for each data point, essentially, because again, it's supposed to be a subset of the regular report. So looking at a screenshot on the next slide, you want to do the same thing as you do with your expenditures, which is comparing your CARES and Disasters Section C to regular Module 2 Section C. Can we move to the next slide? Yep, so on the screen here, on the left hand, you see a screenshot of the regular report, and on the right hand, you see a screenshot of a CARES report. It applies to disaster as well. We're just using the CARES as an example. Notice that this agency is reporting $350,000 in their early Head Start program in the CARES, but again, that's not being counted in what they are reporting in the regular Module 2. So again, when you notice a single instance of that happening, that is a telltale sign that the agency is probably not including what they're reporting in the CARES Module 2 Section C in their regular Module 2 Section C. And again, we ask that you pay special attention to this because we do want to make sure that we are capturing the CARES work in our regular Module 2. Now, a table. Our last couple tables here before we wrap up Module 2, just a table again to show this time what should be reported in your regular CSBG Module 2, right? So earlier we walked through a table to help you calculate what your CARES Module 2 Section C should be like. Now we're helping you calculate what your regular Module 2 Section C should look like, right? So that is simply you take your regular CSBG allocation for that year, right? So we're looking at fiscal year 22. You take your fiscal year 22 regular CSBG allocation, and you just simply add your CARES Module 2 C.2 to it and your disaster Module 2 C.2 to it if you got disaster. And then you just apply that same logic to all the other data points. And now looking at an example where if they happen to get discretionary, right? The previous example is a simple example. This is if an agency happened to get discretionary. Same logic. You look at fiscal year 22, you add up the regular CSBG allocation for fiscal year 22, you add that up with the fiscal year 22 regular CSBG discretionary that they received, and then you always want to make sure that you add that CARES Module 2 C.2 and that Disaster Module 2 C.2 right on top of there to make sure that we're getting it in the regular report as well. So those were some tips to be on the lookout for Module 2, and we will be moving on to Module 4 next. So in Module 4, in the first section, you are reporting on the indicators, the National Performance Indicators, or NPIs, as we call them. And just one thing to note in the NPIs is that there are certain indicators or NPIs that are specific to specific demographics. So in the example I have here, we're just using the example on children ages 0 to 5. Notice on the left hand that FNPI 2A, 2B, and 2C1, they are specifically related to children ages 0 to 5. And so one of the things you want to do as a state office is to compare the numbers served and the numbers being reported in that NPI as obtaining an outcome to the demographics that the agency is reporting. So for example, you see that in the FNPI 2A and 2B, the agency is saying that there were 1,000 children ages 0 to 5 working towards those outcomes. And then they reported in FNPI 2A that 678 children got the outcome and 680 children in FNPI 2B got the outcome, right? But when I look at the demographics, I notice that the agency is only reporting 597 children ages 0 to 5, right? And a simple logic check is, well, you can't have more children get an outcome than the children that you're reporting in your demographics, right? So that will get called out, and states should be on the lookout for those items. But you also want to be mindful, for example, when we take a look at 2C.1, notice that in that example, the agency is reporting 874 children as working towards the outcome in column 1. And then in column 3, they're reporting 290 children. Column 3 is fine, right? Because 290 is less than 597, which is what they're reporting in the demographics. But that first column is still, incorrect because they're reporting more people than what they're reporting in the demographics. And we know that there might be any number of reasons why that's the case, but if you do see it, you should flag it and reach out to the agency to update the data or get an explanation. Next up in Module 4 is the section on services, and it's the exact same logic that we've been saying with Module 2, with the expenditures and resources. The services section also in the regular has to include all of your care services. So in the CARES Module 4 report, you are only reporting on your services that were supported by CSBG CARES, but you then need to make sure that that's also included in your regular Module 4. So you want to look at the two reports side by side. And in the example we have on screen, notice that at the bottom in the CARES report, the agency is reporting 4,559 food distribution boxes, but notice that that is not reported up above in the regular report for Service 5JJ food distribution. Again, when you notice it, that's a telltale sign that the agency is probably not including their services in the regular, and you definitely want to reach out to them to make sure that they do include it in the regular so we can capture that care story in the regular report. And another thing to be on the lookout for on the next slide, even though agencies are not reporting on demographics in the CARES report, they are still reporting on demographics in the regular Module 4, right? So in this example, the agency is telling us that they served 30,988 individuals total, right? That's across their programs as an agency, which means if I look at their CARES report, for example, I also shouldn't see instances where they are serving more people in the CARES service as compared to the total number of people they served. So in Service 5II for prepared meals, the agency is saying that they're serving 65,000 people, right? Well, you can't serve more people than you have in your demographics, right? So you also want to compare your CARES services to the total that they're reporting in the demographics to make sure that they aren't exceeding there. And again, there might be any number of reasons why that is happening, but you should still flag it and reach out to your agencies to get an understanding. The last section in Module 4 is Section C, where you report the all characteristics report, or as I just simply call it, it's the demographics report, right? So as you're completing the all characteristics report, up top in item A is where agencies report the total number of individuals about whom demographics were obtained. And then item B is the total number of households. And as agencies are completing each subsection of the all characteristics report, for example, the individual level characteristics, which is section C in the all characteristics report, those subtotals should add back up to what they were reporting for individuals. And if it's household level characteristics, then those subtotals should add back up to what they were reporting for households. But look at the example on screen. You notice how for gender, see that total adds up to 10,000, which is exactly what we are looking for, because 10,000 is what they reported in item A above, right? The only exceptions to this are military status and work status. We've noticed that agencies are adding it back up to item A, the 10,000 number, but those actually need to total the number of individuals 18 plus, not your total number of individuals, only the number of individuals 18 plus. So when you take a look at military status in this example, notice that that subtotal is coming out to be 4,000, and you see that sort of at the bottom corner of your screen. And that's because 4,000 is the number that this agency had when they added up all of the people over 18 years old in the age that you see in 2D, E, F, G, H, I, J, right? That adds up to 4,000. And so the agency should only be reporting military status and work status for the 4,000 people there, not the 10,000 people above. And then the last item to note for Module 4 is sections E and F. Those are sections that agencies complete to indicate the number of individuals in section E, and then section F is households, but to indicate the number of individuals who may or may not be included in the total demographics above. And that might be because the agency was unable to unduplicate those program participants from the total people that they were reporting above. And just, we want to note, please do not use acronyms, to the best of your ability. If you can just describe what that program is, spell out the program, and then of course, make sure that it's a complete entry. So if you do enter a program here, make sure you are entering the number of individuals and vice versa. If you enter the number of individuals, please make sure that you are entering a complete program name there. And so, with that, just some final suggestions for review, some general tips and tricks to take away with you. We have seen states that do quarterly reporting, even if they use the smart forms or if they have a state system, regardless of how they're doing it, we have seen states that do quarterly reporting, and that helps catch issues early on instead of having to do all this work right before data submission, right? So if you have a process for checking in on the data regularly, you'll be able, reporting period seems off. Let me just get in touch with them from the beginning to make sure that they continue collecting data for the right reporting period, right? Oh, I noticed they happen to not complete this entry here. Let me just reach out to them, in the very beginning instead of trying to fix it all at the end. So we're just putting that out there as a tip. Of course, building in as much time for a pre-review of the data with the agencies helps avoid having a lengthier review memo down the road. And I will say that at the national level, we have certainly seen that. States that have been able to build in that time and have already worked back and forth with their agencies on the data, they do have smaller review memos because they're able to address a lot of the things from the get-go. And so I know that that has been challenging over the past couple years with the implementation of the report for the first time and then other delays in the process, but we are getting closer to a stable timeline. This was the earliest we've released the smart forms ever. So we are getting to a stable timeline at a national level, and we are really hopeful that states and agencies will now have more time to review the data before submitting it to OCS, right? This is all of our data. As state administrators, you guys are the ones submitting the data in OLDC. And so it is your data, and making sure that we are able to get it as right and as accurate as possible. We'll just make sure that you're able to tell a more accurate story there for your state, and then at a national level when we roll that up. And of course, doing TNTA on the annual report in the beginning of the reporting period to help reinforce these concepts, right? We do this webinar series every year. And so helping to repeat and reinforce these concepts to make sure that we are able to get as clean data as possible would just really help the effort overall. So just remind agencies about these items every year. And with that, I believe I am passing it back over to Monique.
Thank you, Muska. I appreciate that. Just some quick final thoughts, and then we'll open up, well, not open up, but then we'll go through some questions. OLDC is now available. So it's available through grantsolutions.gov. You can start submitting module 1 as well as modules 2, 3, and 4. If you have any technical issues, please contact myself, Monique Alcantara, and Nikki Frazier. We ask that you always copy both of us, so that ensures that you get the quickest response humanly possible. And just a reminder that our next webinar is next Wednesday, January 11th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This will be focused primarily on Module 1. You'll learn information about support your submission of the fiscal year 2022 CSBG Annual Report, which is the state administration module for the CSBG Annual Report. The registration link is available via our CSBG Events page, and you can also find the recording for our last webinar there, or a link to that recording as well as the PowerPoint slides. A PDF of this PowerPoint will also be a PDF of this PowerPoint will also be made available on the CSBG Events page, as well as our webinars page. So if you don't have those links, my colleague Nikki will add them to the chat. The PDF of this presentation should be available by tomorrow on the website, and the PDF of the previous presentation is already available. And with that, we will go to some questions. So as I was looking through the questions while Muska was presenting, I do think that for some of them, we'll have to go back to the slide in order to provide some clarity. So we'll ask that you just hang in with us there as we go back to those. So the first question is, are we supposed to be reporting for October 1st through September 30th? I always thought that this report was calendar year. So this is going back to reporting period and making sure that each agency within your state is reporting on the same reporting period. So while everyone's not required to report for October 1st through September 30th, which is A.1b, it is important that everyone in your, or all the agencies or eligible entities within your state are reporting on the same reporting period. So what we've noticed is that the majority of eligible entities within a state, I will just use Minnesota as an example, will select October 1st through September 30th, which is A.1b, and then 2 or 3 will select July 1st through June 30th. So we want to make sure that those 2 or 3 are selecting October 1st through September 30th. Just while we're talking about it, a quick reminder, Module 1 must be reported based on the federal fiscal year, but Modules 2, 3, and 4 can be reported based on the state reporting period. Our next question, I'm going to ask Muska to clarify this.
Yeah.
Slide 7.
Go ahead, Monique. I was just going to ask if we could move to that slide.
Yeah, I'm going to move over really quick. I think it's this one. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, so somebody asked a really good clarifying question. So they're noting that if regular CSBG expenditures were $23,000 and the CARES were $33,957, does that mean the regular report should actually report $53,957? So if that $23,000 in the regular module 2 is only reporting the regular CSBG expenditures, yes, you have to add on the CARES expenditures, which in this case, you would get a total of $56,957. I think the math was just a little off there, but yes, if your regular report is not already including the CARES, you would add your CARES on top of that, which in this example equals $56,957.
Thanks, Muska. Our next question, I'll stay on this slide because it is related to A.2, is, well, it's more of a statement. We increase the total percentage of CARES passed through to our agencies via a contract amendment at the beginning of fiscal year 2022. So each will report a slightly higher amount on line A.2 this year. Should we just make a note of this in Module 2 through Module 4 comments template so you're aware? Yes, that's a perfect example of a great comment to include in your comments template. Also, make sure that you update Module 1 to show the actual allocations. If you update it, and that would be Module 1 E.2, we'll make sure we'll talk about that more next week. But if you did make updates to those original allocations, we want to make sure that's reflected as well in Module 1. Should LIWAP be reported under other resources? So that's going to, and Muska, I don't know if you remember that exact slide, but that is going to module 2, section C. And I believe it's,
Let's
yes,
go to
this
22.
slide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to touch on that?
So I think, Monique, I would also defer to you on that one because I don't know what guidance has been given out on LIWAP, but LIWAP is not, as of right now, a standard entry on the Module 2, Section C form.
Yes, so that's correct. LIWAP should be reported under C.3b.12. You would add the other HHS resource description and the CFDA number and then the dollar amount. Again, if it's included in our standard, and since LIWAP is a newer grant, it wasn't included in our standards, you should not add it to C.3b.12. But if it is a standard, if it's already listed, you should add it to where it was previously listed. But so short answer, yes, LIWAP should be reported under other resources. Going to the next question, if we do the review of CARES data to find we reported these areas inaccurately from year to year, do we need to go back and amend prior to submitting fiscal year 2022 CARES annual report? I'm going to say no for now. This is something that we've been discussing. We do expect to see some changes in the 2022 reporting. That's why we want to make sure to get this webinar sooner rather than later, considering that's the final report. So as we review that data, we may reach back out to you to ask you to update prior year reporting, but we are not asking you to do that right now. So
in the comments, I was just going to say, yes, the priority is getting your fiscal year 22 right? Let's focus on this right now. But in the comments, it would be helpful if you're able to give us that background, letting us know if it was incorrect previously, because that's information that helps us assess your 22 data.
Yeah, great, great add, Muska. What is the difference in the chart with CARES C.2? So I'm going to go to that slide. I believe it's the first table that we showed, which would make it slide 26. I believe this is the correct one. Let me just double check it.
I don't know which table exactly they're referring to, but I think it was just the first row, just in layman's terms, kind of explains what we're looking for, right? Which is the allocation the first year and then carryover, right? And then the second row just kind of breaks down like how you would calculate that carryover, right? Which is your allocation minus your expenditures from fiscal year 20 and then minus your expenditures from fiscal year 21.
Yeah, so the two rows are giving the same information. We just added the specific data point that you would use in order to create the formula. And if you need more clarification, please let us know. We do have a question that I'm going to touch on briefly, but we're going to discuss it more in future webinars. If a state issued every CAA allocations that included discretionary in a single contract that doesn't separate regular allocation from discretionary, and the discretionary allocation was just for CSBG purposes, how can a CAA separate out discretionary spending from regular allocated spending? We've been having a lot of conversations, OCS and NASCAS, about the difference between discretionary and the regular allocation. And so we've been thinking about that and how to train the state on how to collect that information and how to provide that information to the CAA. But if you are doing a contract, the CAA should be aware of what source the funding is from. So this is an idea for future planning, preparing for success, and future contracts. You want to make sure to separate out those two line items so that the CAA knows exactly where their spending is coming from. An earlier state mentioned that they updated the allocations. So it was no longer considered discretionary funds. They decided to pass it through to the eligible entities. So in that case, it wouldn't be considered discretionary anymore. It would be part of the regular allocation. So for now, if you've already done it that way and there's no way for the CAA to separate it, I will say, let's discuss that a little bit more because we want to make sure that we have accurate reporting as much as possible. But you'll have to accept what they've submitted for now, and then we'll continue discussing this and how to update those reports. We may come back in future months to make those updates later.
And I'll just say, for the purpose of reporting for C.2 for this year, right? Like, essentially what it comes down to is what is left from what they have received till date, right? And so, you know, I don't know how this factors into, I don't know when you did these contracts, right? Are we talking about the original CARES contract or whatever, right? But just keep that in mind as well. It's essentially what is left from all the money they've received till date, and did they get new money for fiscal year 22, right? Just keep that in mind.
I think they were also thinking about 8.2
Yeah.
as well, though,
Yeah.
because they won't be able to separate out from 8.2.
Yeah.
If the eligible entity is not sure what the difference is. Based on the demographics of the example given, the module 4 FNPI 2, 0 through 5 numbers are duplicated. Is that correct? I'm going to go to that slide. Give me 1 second. Is it this one? Yes. I believe it was this slide when this question came in.
I think they're looking at, let me pull it up. They're looking at that NPI on children ages 0 to 5. So that's slide 36.
Okay.
So you're saying based on the demographics, right? FNPI 2, we're looking at people ages 0 to 5. Does that mean that those numbers are duplicated? Yes and no. I mean, we don't know what the reason is, right? I think that's kind of the point, is checking in with the agencies to see what might be causing the data to look this way. There could be any number of reasons. It could potentially be, as you're saying, that they're actually duplicating counts in that NPI, right? And that could very much be the case, in which case you would ask them to please provide an unduplicated count. Or it could be that they just didn't report on all the children ages 0 to 5 that they served in the demographics, right, for whatever reason. So there could be any number of reasons, but you are thinking along the right thought process, right, which is trying to figure out what's the reason and figuring out what next steps are.
Okay, going to the next question. And for any of these questions that we're answering, if you need additional clarification, please feel free to request that in the Q&A, and we'll go back to that question. So going back to slide, what was it, 37? The question is, the number of prepared meals can exceed the number of individuals because you're counting how many meals each person has consumed, correct? Yes. So what we've, 5JJ, 5II are 2 data points that can exceed the number of individuals. However, what we are asking is that you still double check and make sure in your comments that the agency is saying this is an unduplicated count. We were unable to unduplicate it. There are some agencies that are reporting an unduplicated count. So if you can confirm that the count that you did, that this agency is reporting, is unduplicated, please confirm that in your comments template when you submit your report. Module 1 template. So the last question that we have so far, and if there's any more questions, feel free to add them. But the module 1 template, I apologize. I was under the impression that we already had one created. We will have one by tomorrow. We will add it and send out a quick notice when it's available. The PDF version is available, released with CSBG Action Transmittal 2023-01, which was released last week and is available on our website. I'll ask one of my colleagues to add the link to that to the chat. And we'll go from there. We have already added the webinars link to the chat, and I believe we'll be adding the events page. It looks like we have one more question. Would you mind quickly going over the funnel method for module 4? Should we be carrying the start of the funnel through all the FNPIs associated with it, like we do with the PPR? I think this is more applicable with the employment FNPIs. Individual will obtain a job, then individual will maintain the job for 90 days, then individual will maintain the job for 180 days. So actually what I would like to do with that so that we can have a good example for you is reserve that question for our webinar that's scheduled for the week after next, which will focus on modules 2 and 4 again. Again, this webinar is really preparing you guys to review the submissions from the eligible entities before you submit them to OCS. The webinar for modules 2 and 4 will be more focused on individual data points and how to submit that data. So we will make sure that this information is included in that next webinar that's scheduled to take place in 2 weeks. We are seeing some other chats. We'll make sure that everyone receives their smart forms. If you have not received your smart form yet, please send me or your program specialist a quick email, and we'll make sure that we work with NASCAS to get you your smart forms. I'm not seeing any additional questions. So, when an agency uses an explanation and it skews the data overall, does it get pulled from the greater numbers? No, it doesn't get pulled from the greater numbers, but it does help us in telling the CSBG story. So that's why it's important to have that information, include those comments so that we know how to tell the story, even if it seems really trivial. Knowing that information does help us when we're preparing the OCS annual report, preparing the report to Congress, having that information. And guess what? It results in you having one less comment in your review memo. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Verna to close us out with some final thoughts.
I just wish I could help everybody take a collective deep breath and thank both Monique and Muska for a very comprehensive overview today. I was literally, I don't know if you all can see my book, but I was sitting here taking notes about everything that was shared. And I guess, you know, I think there are 2 things I want to do, and I want to make sure that we're off by 4:30, but you know, as we continue working towards what I talked about earlier, which is reaching the peak, we'll be laying foundations like this for the continuous climb, which represents continuous improvement. And I think that's why you heard phrases throughout this webinar about going beyond the data, going beyond the annual report, being responsive, being compliant, preparing for success, cross-checking data points, doing a webinar as a best practice, highlighting best practices. We even talked about where we could show highlights. But I think that it is fair that since you all ask us questions, that we ask you just a few questions as we close this webinar. So I'm going to invite everyone to put your quick responses in the chat. We're going to do this really, really quickly, and we're going to see just how much we retained from this webinar. So I've got quick questions for you. Please answer in the chat. First question: the annual report is a requirement as outlined in what section of the legislation? Put your answers in the chat. Let's see who's going to be our star pupils. The annual report is a requirement as outlined in what section of the legislation? Monique or someone let me know if people are answering and if they're getting it right.
Everyone's answering and everyone's getting it right. Ooh, we had someone who actually listed the US code.
Oh, okay. All right, question number 2, very quickly. We reference PEAK as our performance management framework, PEAAK. Does anyone know what it stands for? If so, put it in the chat. PEAK, PEAAK. Let's see if anybody gets it. You all let me know. I think we have some responses coming in, Monique. I think we okay. Yep. I'm seeing it. Okay, this was mentioned a few times during the webinar. Do not include what? When you're giving your report, do not include what? If you're putting the name of a program or you're putting the name of something, you should not include what? I see it coming through. I think Muska, yeah, Yep. Okay. 2 more and then we're done, I promise. States should ensure all agencies select the same what? I am liking what I am seeing in the chat. Okay, this is the last one. This is a bonus. And this is the last one. When is the annual report due? That's your bonus question. When is the annual report due? I have seen correct answers to all 5 questions. So I'm going to say shout out and thank you to everyone for participating and being active, attentive listeners. Thank you for the questions that you have asked. We'll make sure that everything comes back out to you. Again, thanks to Monique and Muska for a job very well done with putting this together. And we'll see everyone again next week on the next annual report webinar, which is going to be January the 11th.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to make sure. Somebody might need to check me. Thank you all so very much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.